Joe, is it true that you used to fly airliners in Hawaii?
I did, Rick. I was a Hawaiian Airlines pilot for 30 years.
That seems like a dream job, just too good to be true.
It was. I enjoyed every minute of it, from the very first second till the last moment. I enjoyed every second of it. I didn't regret a single minute of it. It sure beat the heck out of working.
I can well imagine. Tell me, did you start flying, what, in the military or civilian life, or how'd you get involved in aviation?
Yeah, well, I started flying in the Navy. Well, I did a little cheating flying before the Navy. You weren't supposed to be an aviator till you got into Navy flight training, but I flew in my hometown at the local airports a little bit, in Piper Cubs and things like that. But my basic training and my formal training was in the Navy, and that was right after the war, Rick. I went into the Navy during the war to get into flight training, but there were so many in the V7 program that they said, well, you know, best way for you to get into flying is to get in the regular Navy, and you can then get into flight training from that. Well, I found myself in Guadalcanal right after that on a destroyer. I stayed there for the whole war.
Recruiters are wonderful, aren't
they? They really have a way about them.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your hometown. Just where is that?
Well, it's in Corinth, Mississippi. That's where I went to high school, where I was born, and ended up going to high school. I lived in Mississippi and Tennessee for my entire growing up years.
Wow. So you went from Mississippi to the military to Hawaii? Is that how that worked?
That's right, yes. From Mississippi to California, the Navy, and then all during the war. Of course, I was out in the Pacific on the Buchanan, the USS Buchanan, DD-484. We won the war, of course, we say, but didn't we? Boy, really makes you wonder, doesn't it? But then I ended up going to flight training immediately after the war was over.
Well, how on earth did you go from all that to the dog world?
Well, I got married, and
wait, I am dying to hear the connection.
And Marilyn, my wife, came with a love of dogs. She'd had a dog all during her childhood, and just dearly loved this black Cocker Spaniel that she had. So we just had to have a Cocker Spaniel. And we went out and bought we spent all the money we had, which was $35, and bought a Cocker Spaniel. And Rick, believe it or not, it went from that.
Is that right? So a Cocker Spaniel was your first breed?
Yes, it was. And we decided we'd breed this little bitch we got. And so we went around trying to find a stud dog, and we were very lucky to go over and find Don Burum. And Don Burum in Kailua, Hawaii, he said, well, let me take a look at your bitch. And we walked out to the car, and he looked through the window and saw the bitch, and he turned around to me and he said, Joe, if you want to breed dogs, he said, you shoot that one and come back and we'll talk about it later.
That's kind of cruel, but to the point, I guess.
He was a very smart man. He was smarter than that. He was one of the best dog men we knew. And he got us started on the right track, thinking along the right lines at least.
Now, this was in Hawaii?
Yes, that was in Hawaii.
What year was all this starting?
Well, that was 1951. That was 51 when we got our first dog. And then the Navy recalled me to the Korean War and sent me from Hawaii to Miami for refresher training. I was flying every day, but they sent me back for refresher training. I ended up in Pensacola. I ended up flying an admiral around for in his command that covered the entire United States, and in a DC-3. And so I sold him a Cocker Spaniel, and we went everywhere showing dogs.
Well, so the original breeder, is he the one that introduced you to shows then?
Yes. Well, Don had won a second place ribbon with his first dog, and that started him in breeding Cocker Spaniels, and he was the one that just got us interested. We didn't do any more We didn't do any breeding out in Hawaii. We didn't shoot our dog as he suggested. We did breed her later, though. We outsmarted him. We bought another dog for $35 and bred her.
What a wizard!
Had our first tragic litter, which we loved, of course, and then our second dog was a show dog that we bought from the Crackies, Lee and Ruth Cracky in St. Louis, and then our third we bought a Grimes Bibitch out of South Carolina, and we were off and running, and she was a flyer.
Well, then, did you do most of your showing there in Hawaii?
No, our first showing was done out of Pensacola, Florida. We got into Pensacola Dog Fanciers, and it was a small club, and it was so small, in fact, that they were glad to see us become members, and we were show chairman within a year, so you know how that goes. But we made some really good friends in Pensacola in the Deep South Circuit, and showed our dogs from there to start with.
Okay, but what about all the time you were flying for the Hawaiian Airlines? You were living in Hawaii, I assume, and showing there?
Yes, we, while I was in the Navy and while I was on the mainland in 1951, 52, and 53, that was to fight the Korean War. Great place to fight, huh?
Oh, you were fighting the Korean War? I got a little confused there. I thought that was in Korea.
Right, I did too. But anyway, we showed dogs a lot here, and I, of course, wrote for the dog magazine some articles. In fact, in those days, I should have been smarter. Bart King had a magazine called Cocker's Calling, and I wrote a few articles in that, and all the people in Hawaii read those articles, you know, and by the time we got back to Hawaii, we were celebrities of sort. In other words, we had been to the mainland. A lot of people in Hawaii didn't go to the mainland in those days. It took 10 hours or 11 hours to fly, of course, across from Hawaii to the mainland, and so anybody who had showed dogs on the mainland was supposed to be, in quotes, an expert, or at least a little more knowledgeable. But that certainly has changed, because the dog game in Hawaii is one of the most sophisticated in the world now. But you remember in the 50s, it was tough going back and forth.
Well, even today, though, isn't it a bit restrictive there? I mean, with your import laws, you can't just pop in and out, and you only have a limited number of shows a year, so that's got to be something of a handicap, isn't it?
Oh, it's a very big handicap, of course. It's the quarantine that you're thinking about that's the big barrier there, and you can't just take a dog who's been winning in California or New York or the Midwest and take him to Hawaii and show him and do things big with him. They've got to go through quarantine, 4 months of quarantine, and that's tough.
Were you involved in any other breeds besides Cockers?
Yes, our second breed was boxers, and we bred some fairly good boxers, and Lois Matthews in Hawaii steered us along good lines there. And then in those days, Rick, we only had two so-called professional handlers in Hawaii, and they charged $25 a show to show your dog, so they didn't get many dogs. And if you wanted to be a judge, of course, in those days, you're too young to remember that, but in those days, if you wanted to be a judge, you couldn't handle dogs for money. And so I started, people would ask me to show their dogs, people who were excellent breeders, like people who were older, 75 or 80 years old, and were still breeding really good West Island White Terriers, and they would say, would you show my dog? And so I just became adept at showing, and showed a lot of dogs for free for a lot of good breeders. Mary Lisa and Dobermans, and the Kaisers asked for some help occasionally with their poodles. They brought some good professional handlers over in those days, and we got a lot of help.
Well, I know you're also something of a Norwich enthusiast at one time.
Yes. I noticed that you've got a company called the Norwich Company or some of the other now.
Just pure coincidence, but you did breed and show those for a while, didn't you?
Yes, we there was a magazine you may remember out of Philadelphia called Popular Dogs for a while. Mrs. Brearley was the editor, and it was George Foley's property, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, she each year had the top winning dog, like we have all these other, what do you call them, rankings and so forth. Anyway, she wrote us a letter in 1966 and said, "Congratulations, we were the top Norwich Terrier exhibitors in America. We had a dog that went third in the group that year."
Well, in those days, though, for the breed, that was really a big deal.
Well, the next year we went fourth in the group, and we were still in '67 were the tops. But, there were probably only 3 or 4 Norwiches before ours that were even shown here in the U.S. anywhere. I remember
to place in the group.
To place in the group or to do anything, and you know, to get any points for any kind of ranking or anything like that. You know, everybody has to have a superlative. You got to be the best in Oktibbeha County or something or the other.
Absolutely, absolutely. When did you start judging then?
I started, my first point show was judged in 1957. But that's 35 years ago. I judged quite a few matches before that. Again, when I went back to Hawaii, I became president of the Cocker Spaniel Club of Hawaii right away, and became a member of the Hawaiian Kennel Club. And quite a few of the organizations out there asked me to judge matches, and I liked it, and I thought I'd apply for a license, and I was licensed in 1957. Judged my first point show in '57.
Well, I'm going to ask you more about that in a moment, but first it's break time.
This is Angie Dickinson. The Morris Animal Foundation advances health care for the animals who share our lives. Horse lovers like me are glad to know that Morris helped develop a vaccine for Potomac horse fever and that it's working on colic and other diseases. To learn more about health care for horses, dogs, cats, and other animals, call the Morris Animal Foundation, toll-free 1-800-530-8530. That's 1-800-530-8530.
This is Rick Rutledge, back with our special guest, Joe Tacker. Joe, starting a judging career in Hawaii, I understand it's a land of paradise. I've been there, and I'm ready to go back and stay. But for an aspiring judge needing assignments to accumulate breeds and all that goes with it, that couldn't have been too easy over there, was it?
Well, it wasn't easy at all, Rick. We only had 2 dog shows a year on Oahu, and for a while we had one on Maui, but the people over there got disgusted with the thing and dropped their show for most of the time. Now they have quite a few clubs over there, and they deservedly so. But in the years that we were there in the 60s and 70s and so forth, we basically had 2 shows. And you're right, it was very difficult to aspire to do to be a multi-breed judge, you might say. And I was very, very, very lucky in that my very first show that Mr. Champion, ER Champion in Hawaii, who was president and is president of the Hawaiian Kennel Club now, asked me to judge cockers at the all-breed show. And there was a young man by the name of Derek Rain on the slate. And I had never met Derek Rain, but that night at the dinner after the show, he asked me, he said, "How would you like to judge the Del Monte Kennel Club show?" And of course, I just about flipped, because the Del Monte Kennel Club show was the blue ribbon show of the West Coast, and it was staged at the lodge at Pebble Beach. And he said, "What would you charge me to judge cockers?" I said, "I won't charge you anything, and I'll walk over there." I felt like I felt on top of the world. Well, I judged that show and had a fantastic entry of cockers, of course, because they didn't know they'd never seen me judge before. They didn't know what you'd do, so they entered their dog, right? But Derek seemed to be very pleased and invited me back to do another show a couple of years after that, after I got boxers on my license. And so you kind of get noticed when you're, I think, when you do one of those shows. Anyway, I got a lot of invitations, and being an airline pilot, I think, Rick, that the combination.